Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where we discuss leading political, economic, and geostrategic developments on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. We have a lot to cover. It's been a very big day. Let's jump in. Nintendo's highly anticipated Switch 2 and Sony's highly popular PS5 could see significant price hikes as a result of the intensifying trade conflict between the United States and China. Despite recent limited exceptions granted by Washington for products like smartphones and notebook computers, gaming consoles, many of which are still primarily manufactured in China, remain exposed to newly imposed US tariffs of up to 145%. This is a big deal. The gaming sector is bigger than the film and music industries combined. An internal assessment memo by a major supplier to Apple and Nintendo, reviewed by Japan-based financial media outlet Nikkei Asia, confirms that game consoles are among the products still subject to the full 145% so-called reciprocal tariff rate. This puts Nintendo's upcoming Switch 2 in a curious position. The bulk of Nintendo's console production remains in China, with only a smaller portion now relocated to Vietnam. In response, the company has reportedly delayed US pre-orders for the Switch 2 while evaluating the full impact of the duties. Sony's PlayStation 5 is also affected. Although the console is now 4 years old, it continues to be produced in significant quantities in China. The Japanese technology giant has preemptively raised PS5 prices in multiple international markets, including Europe, the UK, and Australia, by around 10 to 11%. Analysts view this as a strategic move to offset anticipated losses in the US once the tariffs are enforced. The new European price is €500, while in the UK it has risen to £430. Therefore, to some extent, global consumers are subsidizing products for US consumers. US-based Bloomberg Intelligence has projected that console makers like Sony and Nintendo could be forced to increase prices by as much as 30% in the United States to maintain profitability. Analysts note that such a move would be significant ahead of the launch of blockbuster titles like Grand Theft Auto 6, expected to be one of the most lucrative and high-demand video game releases in history. Meanwhile, other China-made technology products are being similarly affected. According to the same supplier memo, smart speakers, Bluetooth speakers, and wireless headphones are now subject to tariffs of 145%, 152.5%, and even 170%. Though many of these products have seen production shift to Southeast Asia, the new origin countries are still facing a temporary 10% tariff for the next 90 days. Most TVs made in China now face tariffs of 156.4%, though some assembly has moved to Mexico in recent years. Even smartphones and laptops produced in China, though temporarily exempt from the new reciprocal tariffs, are still subject to a 20% basic tariff. Chinese-made servers and electric switches face a 45% tariff. While the United States Trade Representative's Office released a list of exempted products on the 11th of April, covering smartphones, laptops, and some servers, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick warned that those same products, along with chips, could face new tariffs within a month. We discussed this in yesterday's video. In anticipation of further shifts in US trade policy, key technology suppliers such as Foxconn, Quanta Computer, and Pegatron have been ramping up production in countries like Vietnam, Thailand, and India. Sources speaking to UK-based The Financial Times say that even after the exemption of smartphones and notebooks, these facilities continue to operate at full capacity, reflecting widespread concern about the volatile trade environment. With the US-China trade dispute escalating and no signs of resolution on the horizon, gaming console makers are being forced to adapt quickly, whether by raising prices, shifting production, or delaying major product launches. The impact on consumers could be significant, especially as the holiday season and major game releases draw near. As tariffs continue to bite, both industry and gamers are bracing for a more expensive era in interactive entertainment. But it is also clear that if the US trade restrictions on China remain in place, we will likely see global manufacturing move en masse from China to Southeast Asia, India, and Mexico, a trend that has already been in place for some time, and in some cases, manufacturing will likely return to North America. At the end of the day, what this all means, ultimately, is the end of the Made in China era as we know it. Next up, a former advisor to China's central bank has warned of serious risks to the country's vast overseas assets as trade tensions with the United States threatens to spill into the financial domain. Yu Yongding, a senior economist at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, CAS, voiced his concerns at a forum in Beijing following US President Donald Trump's latest tariff hikes. Yu cautioned that the US has, quote, spared no efforts in weaponizing the US dollar, end quote, raising the possibility of financial measures that could imperil China's foreign holdings, particularly its US-denominated assets. Quote, we should be prepared and take concrete measures to minimize potential losses in the future, end quote. He said. China holds around $3.2 trillion in foreign exchange reserves and had $10.2 trillion in total overseas assets at the end of 2024, much of it in US dollars. Its holdings of US Treasury securities have declined significantly since 2017, falling to $760.8 billion by January, placing it behind Japan. Yu's warnings come amid growing speculation over potential US strategies to reduce its debt burden. Of particular concern is the so-called Mar-a-Lago Accord, a hypothetical plan floated by current US economic advisor Stephen Moran to weaken the dollar and restructure foreign-held debt into ultra-long-term bonds, move Yu described as tantamount to default, though others would disagree. In a recent journal article, Yu and fellow CAS researcher Yang Bo-han argued that the weaponization of the US dollar has undermined its global credibility and threatens the post-Bretton Woods financial order. While some speculate China might devalue the yuan in response to tariff volatility, Yu dismissed fears of an abrupt currency shift. And indeed, with tariffs so high, it is unlikely that Beijing can devalue the currency enough. With financial pressure rising, Yu's call underscores growing anxiety in Beijing over the security of its global financial assets. Speaking on these comments, Peking University Professor of Finance Michael Pettis observed today, quote, it won't be easy for China to shift away from US assets, but to the extent it tries, this could create a new set of tensions within the global trading system. That's because every year China must acquire enormous amounts of foreign assets to balance its surplus. In the past, these foreign assets have mostly been in the US, but if China were to start buying non-US assets, while at the same time selling off part of its existing US holdings, this would mean a major redirection of asset purchases, mainly to the EU and Japan. In that case, unless the EU and Japan neutralize their purchases by acquiring equivalent amounts of US assets, something their central banks will not want to do as it will mean giving up control over monetary policy, we would see enough of a decline in the value of the dollar and a rise in the value of the euro and the yen to shift part of the US trade deficit to the EU and Japan. Such a large change in their external balances will cause corresponding changes in their internal balances that are likely to be economically disruptive. For all the talk of its currency privilege, I do not think either Japan nor the EU will be eager to take on the associated burden by shifting towards large trade deficits. They are likely to be very unwilling to accommodate China's excess savings, but what else can China buy? End quote. With this US-China trade war, we are living through history. If you want to continue to be on top of the most up-to-date news and analysis on this new Cold War which is transforming the world, consider subscribing to China Update, and you will be. If you're getting value from today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you would like to help keep China Update financially sustainable, this channel relies primarily on subscriber support. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much. And finally for today, General Secretary Xi Jinping arrived in Vietnam on yesterday, urging solidarity among fellow communists as China faces mounting pressure from its trade war with the US. Writing in Vietnam's official Communist Party newspaper ahead of the visit, she condemned trade and tariff wars as, quote, winless, end quote, and emphasized the importance of defending global supply chain stability and multilateralism. She was greeted at the airport by the Vietnamese president, a rare honor that signals the growing significance of China-Vietnam ties. This marks Xi's second visit to Vietnam in under 18 months and the first leg of his 2025 overseas tour, which also includes stops in Malaysia and Cambodia, where trade will also be top of the agenda. She met with Vietnam's Communist Party General Secretary, To Lam, stressing the enduring bond between the two nations over the past 75 years. Reacting to the meeting from the Oval Office, US President Donald Trump said the discussions in Vietnam were focused on how to harm the US, even though he didn't hold it against them. Quote, I don't blame China, I don't blame Vietnam, end quote, Trump told reporters at the White House, adding, quote, that's a lovely meeting like trying to figure out how do we screw the United States of America, End quote. The visit yielded multiple agreements, including a pledge to deepen cooperation in supply chains, production, 5G technology, and artificial intelligence. China remains Vietnam's top source of imports and a key supplier of raw materials to its growing manufacturing sector. Vietnam, an increasingly important manufacturing hub, has benefited from Chinese investment, $1.2 billion in new direct investment in Q1 of 2025 alone. As companies seek to bypass steep US tariffs, China is facing a 145% tariff rate, while Vietnam is negotiating a reduction from its current 46%. In a meeting with Vietnamese Prime Minister, the head of Chinese aircraft maker Comac was encouraged to invest in aviation support facilities in Vietnam. Meanwhile, Vietnam is working to boost exports to China to hedge against risks from the intensifying US trade war. While the relationship is very close, it is also complex. Vietnam recognizes that China has traditionally been its key strategic threat, and indeed tensions in the South China Sea are ongoing. While China is a very important economic partner, the US represents the more important customer. A major industrial and assembly hub, the US is Vietnam's main export market, for which it is a crucial source of everything from footwear, apparel, and electronics. This is why Vietnam is moving heaven and earth to reach a negotiated settlement with Washington. While both China and Vietnam are nominally communist, like everywhere, money talks, and its voice is very loud. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. Now, normally we try to take Wednesdays off now on China Update, but with so much going on, it may be the case that there is an extra episode tomorrow on Wednesday. We will see how things develop. But for now, thank you for watching. Have a good Tuesday, and I will either see you tomorrow or on Thursday.